I realize the pursuit of peace is not as dramatic as the pursuit of war, and frequently the words of the pursuers fall on deaf ears. But we have no more urgent task.
The assassination of President John F. Kennedy on November 22, 1963, has spawned countless conspiracy theories, ranging from plausible to outright bizarre. In this video, I'll show you how JFK's actions and strong will unfortunately led to his assassination, a fate that Donald Trump almost experienced, for very similar reasons to what JFK stood for. The actions of JFK prove he was right all along on the type of president that this country needs and has always needed, and this is why they assassinated him. Firstly, JFK pushed for transparency. Kennedy's policies and speeches often emphasized freedom, transparency, and the fight against secrecy. His famous 1961 address to the American Newspaper Publishers Association warned against secret societies and the dangers of hidden powers influencing democracies. As simple as this was, it did not sit well with those who had secrets to keep. Doesn't that remind you of Donald Trump and his policies? Trump's also focused on ensuring that there's transparency in his government. Secondly, JFK's fortunes were further reduced by his plans to abolish the Federal Reserve. One of the Illuminati's cornerstones of power is their control over the global financial system. Kennedy did not care. Instead, he fearlessly signed Executive Order 11,110, which aimed to reduce the Federal Reserve's control over currency by allowing the Treasury to issue silver-backed notes. When you mess with people's money, you definitely attract their attention, and this was the case with President Kennedy. Thirdly, and this is where Trump and Kennedy's fortunes align heavily, their opposition to the military-industrial complex. The term military-industrial complex was popularized by President Dwight D. Eisenhower in his 1961 farewell address, where he warned against the growing power of the defense industry and its influence on government policy. He cautioned that unchecked collaboration between the military and private contractors could lead to perpetual war for profit, eroding democracy and prioritizing financial gain over public welfare.
My uncle, John Kennedy, he realized early on that the purpose of the CIA and the intelligence apparatus was to create a constant pipeline of new wars. Eisenhower, who was the outgoing president, gave what is probably the most important speech in American history, which was, where he warned against the military-industrial complex. I was at my uncle's inauguration. I was in Washington that day, a 6-year-old boy. And 2 months later, the military and intelligence came to him and said, we got to invade Cuba. And he was like, I'm not going to Cuba, and I'm not going to let the military. And they said, well, we got all these Cubans trained, and they're going to go attack Castro. And he said, well, the U.S. government can't be doing that. I don't like what Castro's doing down there, but it's not the United States' job to dictate what kind of governments other countries have. And they said, well, as soon as they land, there's going to be a big revolution. Everybody's going to rise up and they're going to overthrow Castro. And he said, well, you can't use the U.S. military. And they ended up bringing those guys over. And in the middle of it, the night, they came to him and said, they're getting wiped out on the beach and you need to send in the military and invade. And he said, we're not going to do it. He stepped out of that meeting and he realized they had been lying to him and trying to trick him. And he said, I want to take the CIA and shatter it into 1,000 pieces and scatter it to the winds. For the next 1,000 days of his presidency, he was at war with his military and intelligence apparatus. They tried to get him to go into Laos. He said no. They tried to get him to go into Vietnam. They said that we need 250,000 combat troops. He refused. Everybody around him wanted him to go into Vietnam. He sent 16,000 military advisors. They weren't allowed to fight. Many of them did. They both violated the rules of engagement. In October of 1963, he heard some of his Green Berets had been killed over there. And he said, I want a total casualty list from Vietnam. And his aide came to him and said, 75 Americans have died. He said, that's too many. And he signed that day a national security order ordering all troops out of Vietnam, U.S. troops. And then a month later, he was killed.
JFK not only shared Eisenhower's concerns but actively sought to challenge this entrenched system, making him a target for assassination. JFK's opposition to the military-industrial complex is a critical aspect of many theories surrounding his assassination, and probably one of the biggest reasons Donald Trump almost faced a similar fate. This theory ties Kennedy's death to powerful forces within the defense sector, intelligence agencies, and political elites who stood to lose from his policies and vision. Here's a deeper look at this. In 1963, JFK reportedly signed the National Security Action Memorandum 263, which outlined plans to withdraw 1,000 U.S. military advisors from Vietnam by the end of 1963 and envisioned a complete withdrawal by 1965. This decision directly threatened the interests of defense contractors, who stood to profit immensely from an expanded conflict. After JFK's assassination, his successor, Lyndon B. Johnson, reversed this policy and escalated U.S. involvement in Vietnam, leading to massive expenditures on weapons, supplies, and logistics. Isn't it similar to what we're seeing now with Trump, who is unwilling to continue support the war in Europe? The Cold War and Vietnam War were massive profit generators for defense contractors like Lockheed, Raytheon, and General Dynamics. Any shift toward de-escalation, disarmament, or withdrawal threatened their revenue streams. Ask yourself this question: which companies are benefiting most from what's going on in Ukraine? You guessed right, it's those that deal in arms and weapons. The military-industrial complex relied on an adversarial foreign policy to secure public and political support for continued investment in arms. If you think about it, Trump is speaking like JFK, and that's probably why not everyone's happy with his election. Trump stands for America first, and he wants to see development in America. J.D. Vance was picked to be Trump's running mate for the same reason. They value the American people more than they care about military companies making profits.
Russians tried repeatedly to settle on terms that were very, very beneficial to Ukraine. The major thing they wanted was for us to keep NATO out of the Ukraine. The big military contractors want to add new countries to NATO all the time. Why? Because then that country has to conform its military purchases to NATO weapon specifications, which means certain companies, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, General Dynamics, Boeing, and Lockheed, get a trapped market. In March of 2022, we committed $113 billion. Just to give you an example, we could have built a home for almost every homeless person in this country. We then committed another $24 billion since then, 2 months ago, and now President Biden's asking for another $60 billion. But the big, big expenses are going to come after the war, when we have to rebuild all the things that we destroyed. Mitch McConnell was asked, can we really afford to spend $113 billion in Ukraine? He said, don't worry. It's not really going to Ukraine.
It's going to American defense manufacturers.
So he just admitted it's a money laundering scheme. And who do you think owns every one of those companies? BlackRock. So Tim Scott, during the Republican debate, said, don't worry, it's not a gift to Ukraine, it's a loan. So raise your hand if you think that that loan is ever getting paid back. Yeah, of course it's not. So why do they call it a loan? Because if they call it a loan, they can impose loan conditions. And what are the loan conditions that we impose on? Number one, an extreme austerity program, so that if you're poor in Ukraine, you're going to be poor forever. Number two, most important, Ukraine has to put all of its government-owned assets up for sale to multinational corporations.